I'm John Espino from The Young Folks, and I'm here today with Bonni Cohen and Jon Shenk for the upcoming documentary, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. So over 10 years ago, An Inconvenient Truth came out and has since become the foremost documentary when it comes to climate change. It has such a unique style, tone, and voice. How did you know what you wanted to keep or change from the previous film and add to the sequel?
That's a great question. An Inconvenient Truth was such a monumental film and moment in documentary film history and environmental history. We really feel like it gave us the language to even have a conversation like this, and it was so vital in so many ways. Not only did it do fabulously well in terms of viewership, but it put the issue on the map for so many people. Bonni and I felt like this sequel was in part an opportunity to update what people had learned and give them a sense of where we are with the climate crisis and the solutions. But we also felt like since that movie was already on the table, that we could actually go a little further than that movie went in terms of getting to know Al Gore as a central character.
That's interesting.
And we felt like if Al was up to it, perhaps we could kind of almost like a behind the scenes film of how the slideshow got made in the first place. That was one of the original ideas. Mm-hmm. So in the movie, you go to. Have you guys seen the movie?
Yeah.
So you go to Greenland. You see him meeting with scientists. You go to Tacloban. You see him meeting with climate refugees. You go to Paris, and this incredible, kind of behind the scenes political thriller takes place there. So we felt like we wanted to certainly put the slideshow in the movie because it's such a signature Gore thing. I mean, that's so much of what he does. He's constantly working on it, as you see in the film. But we felt like there would be an authenticity and kind of just character building potential in showing you how the slideshow gets made. So that's the relationship between stylistically how we wanted to kind of follow in the footsteps of that film because it was just so amazing, but that we felt like we could, bring our own style, which is kind of more fly on the wall observational filmmaking, and help deepen the story.
Plus, observational filmmaking is sort of unassailable, and we felt like if we could create these portals from the slideshow where you're getting updates, there's so much still to learn. People sort of wonder to themselves, what has Al Gore been doing for the last 10 years? What is the science? Where are we? What are the solutions? We can accomplish all of that in the slideshow, but if we enter into portals of where he collects information and how he goes about doing his work, there's the added benefit of not being able to poke as many holes in it.
You both worked on several projects about problems facing the human race. Things from online bullying to Nazis to the Sudanese civil wars to, Star Wars Episode 1. So what drew
Someone did their research.
So what drew you to the topic of climate change?
Well, this is actually our second climate change film. We made a film in 2012 called The Island President, which was about the first democratically elected leader of the Maldives, which is the lowest lying island nation in the world, the most vulnerable to climate change, and he was just an extraordinary character. That's a whole other story. So we were sort of, we were pretty schooled in climate change, the climate crisis, adaptation to the climate crisis, and that was part of why Participant Media called us to ask us to make the sequel. We had worked with them before. This participant is Jeff Skoll. It's his independent studio in Los Angeles. They made the first Inconvenient Truth. And Diane Wireman, who runs his documentary unit, is somebody that John and I had worked with in the past. She was one of the first funders of Lost Boys of Sudan. And I had worked with her on a film called 3.5 Minutes, 10 Bullets. And I think she thought that we would, really take to the subject matter and be able to do something different because of the type of filmmaking that we enjoy doing.
So what kind of inconveniences or problems or challenges did you face when making this documentary?
Yeah, there's so many things. The climate crisis, as you know from seeing the film, has just it's gotten so overwhelmingly worse than it was 10 years ago. Many of the predictions that the scientists were making 10, 15 years ago, that are some of which are in an Inconvenient Truth, have not only come true, but they're actually expanded, and they've gotten worse than previously thought they would be at this point. And so part of the kind of challenge, I guess you could say, in that part of the film was to really choose material that would be emblematic of a number of different things that are happening with the climatic system of the planet. One thing that we learned is that when you mess with a complex system like planet Earth, everything about it changes. It used to be that there was a kind of a thought that how could you necessarily connect an extreme storm or extreme weather event to climate change? Mm-hmm. But science has evolved to thinking that in a complex system where you skew the whole thing, then everything changes. And so we wanted to make sure that we touched on everything, drought, wildfire, sea level rise, storm surges, rain bombs, and then you kind of quickly get into this thing that you see in the film, which is there's so much material out there, a lot of it user-generated video now, and still photographs that people are just noticing in their own lives. Like people in the middle of this country, like waking up and like, oh my God, I can't believe it's raining, or it hasn't rained, or like noticing changes in their own lives. And so I think one major challenge was to try to connect some of those dots in a way that made sense and will make sense for an audience, but also show enough variation in climatic change that people could recognize. Oh, hey, that's similar to my part of the world. Or I have a cousin who lives in Miami. That's what's going on there, and start to connect it to their own lives.
No one can dispute just how much Al Gore has done for the environment. And in the documentary, he mentions that he's a reformed politician. So what exactly does that mean, and how does it affect the way he tackles issues?
This is something we debated a lot with Al. He's done so much as a private citizen, advocating on behalf of the environment. The truth is, he was doing that as a politician as well. He's been doing it for 40 years. Started back when he was in college. But I think what he would say is, if he were sitting here, is that he thought that his life was going to go in a particular direction, and for all of the inconvenient reasons we know, it did not work out that way. And we don't want to sit here and think about what that alternate universe might have been, because it's hard to do that. Yeah. But from a sort of philosophical perspective, but also a tactical perspective, I'm not sure that, we went all over the world, met all kinds of climate activists and leaders in this field. There is no one that's doing precisely what he's doing, because he's able to connect industry, politics, the private sector, ordinary citizens who he spends all this time training. And talk about connecting the dots. When all of those populations kind of interact, and he gets them to interact, as you see in Paris, great things can happen. So I would say, I question this all the time, having spent 2 years with Al Gore. Is the work potentially more vital that he's doing now than he could have done as president? And if he had, I guess the better question to ask is, if he hadn't done it, would anybody else have? And where would we be?
One thing he likes to say when he gets questions along these lines is, he quotes the Chris Christopherson song, which was made famous by Janis Joplin, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." And there's I don't know if you guys are too young to know that song.
Me and Bobby McGee.
Yeah, me and Bobby McGee. But a great song, and there's I think he's partly joking, but I think there's some seriousness in it. I think that he after the defeat of 2000, I think many people probably would have just crawled in a hole and we never would have seen him again. Yeah. But he reinvented himself, and I think that part of that you saw in the original movie is he asked himself, well, what do I really care about? And clearly he cares about the environment and saving the planet for his children and grandchildren. And he just does it with abandon. He kind of doesn't care what people think. He's sort of in the same way that he might have used to if he was trying to get reelected for a campaign.
Especially now that solutions are in place.
Yeah.
Now that it's not just beating the drum about getting people to wake up and face that we're annihilating the planet. Now he can beat the drum about getting the solutions that are already here in place as quickly as possible. So actually this positive message now and this hopeful message is a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to make it less political.
Well, he can go and have a laugh on the street with a Republican mayor in Texas.
Sure.
That's, I don't know. Maybe we would have seen that Al Gore in the White House. We never would have known. But it seems incongruous with partisan politics.
Yeah.
Trying to kind of bring the climate debate out of politics and back into just kind of sort of a cultural debate about what our morals and ethics are as a society.
Yeah, that's kind of into my question. So it seems like climate change has been turned into a political issue, separating into two different political parties.
Yep.
So even though it affects all of us, so what do you think is a solution for it?
This is another thing that Al's very facile with language and what language means, phraseology means to different people at different times in different regions, in this country and the world. What we've learned from him is that it's possible that the problem is language. That maybe there are certain right-wing parts of this country that don't want to label something global warming. Maybe they want to call it weird weather, or maybe they don't want to say that there's man-made climate problems. Maybe they want to say that there's something we don't recognize in what's going on with the heat here, and let's think about that. So. It could be that the way forward has to do with making sure that we all can evolve our communication with each other about how we call this, what this is, but more importantly, all come together around the solutions. Like, it's happening. We can all disagree on what it is, what we want to call it, and what's happening. But we can all agree that from an economic perspective, what's great for the communities around this country is to create jobs in the alternative energy sector, the fastest growing sector, job market in the country, is solar and wind technicians. So we can all agree on that. All of our communities around the country want better jobs and more jobs. And, by the way, it's also better for the environment. So I think that we can agree to disagree, perhaps, on what to call the problem, but we can all agree on the solutions.
So in another 10 years, if you could take a guess, based solely on what you've seen so far this year, do you think the idea of climate change would gain greater acceptance, or would there be more deniers?
One thing that I think there's so much that provides hope in the story that we learned about. One is, the alternative energy revolution, as Al calls it, is really incredible. We really are at this cusp where solar and wind have gotten so cheap, so fast, and the world doesn't quite get it yet, but it is here, and it is getting out there into the world in remarkable ways that Al presents in the film. But the other thing that might be as important is one key difference between now and 10, 15 years ago is that climate change has become a kind of a giant, significant moral, social issue for people.
Right.
People are emotionally connected to it in a way that they did. I remember back in the day, like in the 90s when I was first learning about this, the frustration was, how can we get people to care? It seems so far away and so far off in the distant future. But I think we're here now, partly because I think people are seeing it in their everyday lives. They're noticing it, and they're seeing it on the TV.
Well, it's hard to get people to care when they're paralyzed with fear. Now we can do something.
That's true. But that's true. The other thing is that I think people have been living with it for a couple generations now, and they realize, oh my God, if we don't do something about this, we're going to hand off a planet to our children and grandchildren that's not sustainable. And so it becomes a very personal, emotional issue. Like Bonni and I, we're married, and we work together, and we have 2 teenage kids. The idea that we don't somehow contribute to the solution in this topic, I think, is starting to feel to people almost like if you were alive in the 60s and you weren't on the right side of the civil rights movement. I think it's getting to that place in our culture. And Al points it out in the film. It's not necessarily I and Bonni who recognize this alone, but with his help, I think we started to understand that it's getting to that level of kind of heightened issue in this country. And then, as Al says in the film, once it's at that level, the choice really is clear. It's just a matter of time. but before we all move in the right direction, because that's what always happens when these issues get to that point.
As always, thanks again for listening. And don't forget to check out An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power.